Hello everyone, and welcome back to Chill English Channel. We're very happy you're here with us today.
Hi everyone. Whether you're relaxing at home, studying English, taking a walk, or listening quietly before sleep, thank you for spending time learning with us.
I'm Sophia.
And I'm Jake.
Today, we're going to talk about something many people experience almost every day.
That's right. Today's topic is overthinking.
More specifically, we're going to talk about why people overthink, how it affects emotions and daily life, and how to express these feelings naturally in English.
Overthinking is a very modern problem.
Definitely.
Many people feel mentally exhausted because their minds never fully relax.
Constant thoughts, worries, replaying conversations, imagining worst-case scenarios.
Sometimes the brain feels like it refuses to become quiet.
And for English learners, this is actually a very useful topic because emotional conversations are an important part of becoming fluent naturally.
Learning how to describe thoughts, stress, anxiety, and emotions makes English sound much more real and human.
Before we begin today's conversation, if you enjoy learning English through calm and meaningful discussions like this, please subscribe to Chill English Channel.
Subscribing helps us continue creating peaceful and useful English lessons for learners around the world.
All right, Jake, let me ask you something.
Okay?
Do you overthink a lot?
Honestly, yes. Probably more than I should.
I think many people feel the same way.
Definitely.
What kinds of things do you usually overthink?
Social situations mostly.
Really?
Yeah. Sometimes after conversations, I replay everything in my mind repeatedly.
Ah, yes, that's extremely common.
I start thinking, did I say something awkward? Did that sound strange? What does that person think about me now?
I think many people secretly do that.
Probably much more than people admit openly.
Overthinking often happens quietly inside people's minds.
Especially for thoughtful or sensitive personalities.
Sensitive people often notice emotional details very deeply.
Which can sometimes become emotionally exhausting.
Exhausting is a very important word here.
Yes, exhausting means extremely tiring mentally or emotionally.
For example, overthinking can feel emotionally exhausting.
Or, constant worry becomes mentally exhausting after a while.
Another thing I've noticed is that overthinkers often imagine problems that never actually happen.
Definitely.
The mind starts creating possible future disasters.
Worst-case scenarios.
Exactly.
Sometimes people become anxious about situations that exist only in their imagination.
Anxiety and overthinking are often closely connected.
Especially in modern life.
Social media, pressure, busy lifestyles, constant comparison.
Modern life gives the brain endless reasons to stay mentally active.
Let's teach our listeners a useful sentence pattern.
Good idea.
One natural pattern is, I tend to overthink blank.
For example, I tend to overthink social situations.
Or, I tend to overthink important decisions.
Native speakers use tend to very often when describing habits or personality patterns.
Another useful pattern is, my mind keeps thinking about blank.
For example, my mind keeps thinking about the future.
Or, my mind keeps replaying conversations from earlier today.
Replay is a very useful emotional vocabulary word.
Yes, replay means repeatedly remembering or mentally reviewing something.
Overthinkers replay conversations constantly.
Especially awkward moments.
Especially awkward moments.
Why do you think people overthink so much?
I think one reason is fear.
Fear of what?
Fear of failure, embarrassment, rejection, mistakes.
That makes sense.
Overthinking is often connected to wanting control.
Interesting.
People try to mentally predict problems before they happen.
Almost like the brain is trying to protect itself.
Exactly.
But ironically, overthinking often creates even more stress.
Definitely.
Instead of solving problems, the mind sometimes creates endless mental noise.
Mental noise is a great phrase.
Yes, mental noise means constant thoughts, worries, and internal stress,
Many people struggle to relax because of mental noise.
especially at night.
Nights are dangerous for overthinkers.
Very true,
Nights become quieter externally.
but louder internally.
Exactly.
Many people suddenly start thinking deeply at night.
Past mistakes,
Future worries,
life decisions,
relationships.
embarrassing memories from 5 years ago.
Why does the brain always remember embarrassing things at night?
Honestly, I have no idea.
But it's extremely relatable.
Overthinking often feels irrational.
Rational means logical and reasonable.
Overthinking is often emotional rather than rational.
Even when people know they are worrying too much, they still struggle to stop.
Exactly.
Let's introduce another useful sentence pattern.
You can say, sometimes I get stuck thinking about.
For example, sometimes I get stuck thinking about the future.
Or, sometimes I get stuck thinking about mistakes I made.
Get stuck thinking is a very natural expression in English.
Another common experience is overthinking decisions.
Ah, yes, decision anxiety.
Some people struggle to make choices because they fear choosing incorrectly.
Especially major life decisions.
Career changes, relationships, moving somewhere new.
Modern life gives people so many choices.
Which sounds positive initially.
But too many choices can create anxiety too.
People start thinking, what if I regret this? What if there's a better option? What if I fail?
Overthinking often traps people between possibilities.
Which can create emotional paralysis.
Paralysis is another powerful vocabulary word.
Emotional paralysis means feeling mentally unable to move forward or make decisions.
Sometimes people overthink so much that they stop taking action completely.
Exactly.
Instead of helping, overthinking can create avoidance.
Avoidance means avoiding situations, decisions, or emotions because they feel stressful.
Another thing I've noticed is that overthinkers are often very self-aware.
Definitely.
Self-awareness can be positive.
But too much self-awareness can sometimes become exhausting.
People start analyzing every word, emotion, or interaction too deeply.
Especially socially anxious people.
Social anxiety and overthinking often strengthen each other.
A person worries about social situations,
Then overthinks conversations afterward.
which creates more anxiety next time.
A difficult cycle.
Definitely.
Let's teach another useful expression.
The expression is, I keep worrying about blank.
For example, I keep worrying about the future.
Or, I keep worrying about what other people think.
Native speakers use keep worrying when describing repetitive, anxious thoughts.
Another useful phrase is, my thoughts won't slow down,
That sentence sounds very natural emotionally.
especially when describing mental exhaustion or anxiety.
For example, sometimes my thoughts won't slow down at night.
Or, when I feel stressed, my thoughts won't slow down.
I think modern technology also affects overthinking.
Definitely.
Phones, notifications, social media, constant information.
The brain rarely gets true quiet anymore.
People constantly consume information and compare themselves to others online,
Comparison creates so much unnecessary mental pressure.
especially when social media shows unrealistic lifestyles constantly,
People compare their real lives to carefully edited online highlights.
which can increase insecurity and anxiety.
Insecurity is deeply connected to overthinking.
Insecure people often overanalyze situations more intensely.
Especially relationships and social interactions.
Questions like, do they really like me? Did I sound stupid? Am I good enough?
Those thoughts become emotionally draining over time.
Draining is another useful emotional vocabulary word.
Emotionally draining means mentally exhausting over long periods.
Another important thing about overthinking is perfectionism.
Ah, yes. Perfectionists often overthink everything.
Because they fear mistakes so strongly.
They want every decision, conversation, or action to be perfect, but perfection is impossible.
Exactly. Which means perfectionists often feel constantly dissatisfied or worried.
Overthinking and perfectionism can trap people mentally.
I think many overthinkers are actually very thoughtful people.
Definitely.
Caring deeply is not a bad thing.
Not at all.
The problem begins when thinking becomes excessive and emotionally unhealthy.
Balance is important,
Exactly. Reflection can be healthy.
but endless rumination becomes harmful.
Rumination is another excellent vocabulary word.
Yes, rumination means repeatedly thinking about negative thoughts or situations.
Many overthinkers struggle with rumination without even realizing it.
Maybe one of the biggest problems is that overthinking steals peace from the present moment.
Instead of experiencing life fully, the mind becomes trapped in fear, analysis, and imagined problems. One thing I find interesting about overthinking is that many people don't even realize they're doing it.
That's very true.
Overthinking can become such a normal habit that people begin treating constant stress like a normal mental state.
Especially in modern society, where everyone seems busy, distracted, and mentally overloaded.
Overloaded is a great word here.
Yes, mentally overloaded means having too many thoughts, worries, or responsibilities at the same time.
For example, after work, I often feel mentally overloaded.
Or, social media can make people feel emotionally overloaded.
Another thing many overthinkers struggle with is uncertainty.
Definitely.
Humans naturally want certainty and control,
But life is unpredictable.
which creates anxiety for people who constantly need reassurance.
Reassurance is another very important emotional word.
Reassurance means comfort or confirmation that everything's okay.
For example, some people constantly seek reassurance from others.
Or overthinkers often struggle when they don't have reassurance.
Relationships can become especially difficult for overthinkers sometimes.
Definitely.
Small situations can suddenly become huge emotional stories inside the mind.
Like waiting for a text message.
Exactly.
Someone replies 30 minutes late.
And suddenly the overthinking begins.
Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Do they secretly dislike me now?
Even though the other person is probably just busy.
Very true.
Overthinking often creates emotional interpretations without enough evidence.
Interpretation is another excellent vocabulary word.
Interpretation means the meaning someone gives to a situation or behavior.
Overthinkers often interpret neutral situations negatively.
Especially when they already feel anxious or insecure emotionally.
Let's teach our listeners a useful sentence pattern.
Good idea.
The pattern is, my brain immediately assumes blank.
For example, my brain immediately assumes something bad happened.
Or, my brain immediately assumes people are judging me.
Assume is a very useful emotional and conversational word.
Especially in discussions about anxiety and thought patterns.
Another major reason people overthink is fear of judgment.
Social judgment affects people deeply,
Humans naturally want acceptance and connection.
which means criticism or rejection can feel emotionally painful.
Some people replay social interactions for hours afterward.
Looking for mistakes, awkward moments, signs of rejection, even tiny details.
I think overthinkers often notice details other people completely forget.
Definitely.
Something embarrassing that happened years ago may still feel emotionally alive in their memory.
Meanwhile, everyone else probably forgot it 5 minutes later.
Exactly.
Overthinking often creates the illusion that people are paying much more attention to us than they actually are.
Illusion is another powerful vocabulary word.
An illusion is something that feels real but is not completely true,
Many overthinkers live inside imagined social pressure.
which creates emotional exhaustion over time.
Another thing I've noticed is that overthinkers often struggle to relax.
Relaxation can feel strangely uncomfortable for anxious minds,
Why do you think that happens?
because when life becomes quiet, thoughts become louder.
That's such an accurate description,
Silence gives the brain space to think more deeply,
which can feel peaceful for some people,
but stressful for overthinkers.
especially people who constantly distract themselves.
Phones, videos, music, social media, endless scrolling.
Many people avoid silence without realizing it.
Because silence sometimes forces people to confront their thoughts emotionally.
Confront is another important word.
Confront means facing something difficult directly.
For example, many people avoid confronting their emotions.
Or, overthinking often becomes worse when people avoid difficult feelings,
Avoidance may create temporary comfort.
but usually increases anxiety long-term.
Another interesting thing about overthinking is that it often feels productive.
Ah, yes, that's very important.
People sometimes confuse overthinking with problem solving.
Exactly.
Thinking deeply can feel useful initially,
But eventually the thoughts stop creating solutions and simply repeat endlessly.
which creates mental loops.
Mental loop is a very natural expression.
A mental loop means repetitive thoughts that continue cycling through the mind.
For example, I got stuck in a mental loop all night.
Or, anxiety often creates repetitive mental loops.
Overthinkers sometimes search endlessly for perfect certainty.
But certainty rarely exists completely in real life.
Exactly.
Relationships involve uncertainty.
Careers involve uncertainty.
The future involves uncertainty,
Life itself is uncertain.
which means learning emotional balance becomes very important.
Emotional balance helps people think without becoming consumed by thoughts.
Consumed is another strong emotional vocabulary word.
Consumed means completely controlled or overwhelmed by something emotionally.
For example, he became consumed by anxiety.
Or she became consumed by negative thoughts.
Let's teach another useful sentence pattern.
You can say, I keep replaying blank in my head.
For example, I keep replaying that conversation in my head.
Or, I keep replaying my mistakes in my head.
Native speakers use in my head very often when discussing thoughts and emotions.
Another useful expression is, I can't stop thinking about blank.
For example, I can't stop thinking about the future.
Or, I can't stop thinking about what happened earlier.
Those expressions sound extremely natural emotionally.
Another important topic connected to overthinking is sleep,
Ah, yes. Many overthinkers struggle at night.
because nighttime removes distractions.
Suddenly, the mind becomes very active.
Thoughts become louder, emotions feel heavier, and worries feel bigger.
Problems often seem more dramatic late at night.
Definitely.
Even small issues can suddenly feel overwhelming emotionally.
Which is why many people experience anxiety before sleep,
Sleep anxiety is becoming increasingly common.
especially among people experiencing stress or emotional burnout.
Burnout and overthinking often strengthen each other.
A tired brain usually struggles more with emotional regulation.
Regulation means control or management.
Emotional regulation means managing emotions in healthy ways,
When people are exhausted, anxious thoughts often become stronger.
which creates an unhealthy cycle.
Stress increases overthinking,
Overthinking increases stress,
which creates more exhaustion.
and then even more overthinking.
Another thing many overthinkers struggle with is being present.
Yes, their minds often live in the future or the past,
Worrying about what might happen,
or replaying what already happened.
which makes it difficult to enjoy the present moment fully.
Overthinking steals attention away from real-life experiences.
Sometimes beautiful moments happen while the mind is somewhere else completely.
That's honestly one of the saddest parts of overthinking.
Because life keeps moving while the brain stays trapped inside fear and analysis.
I think many overthinkers are actually deeply caring people.
Definitely.
They care deeply about relationships, mistakes, decisions, and emotions.
Caring is not the problem.
Exactly.
The problem begins when caring transforms into constant fear and mental exhaustion.
Balance is extremely important emotionally,
Reflection can help people grow.
but endless rumination slowly destroys peace of mind.
Maybe one of the biggest challenges for overthinkers is learning when to let thoughts go.
Because not every thought deserves endless attention.
Now that we've talked about anxiety, mental loops, social pressure, and emotional exhaustion, let's focus on something practical.
Yes, let's talk about how to express overthinking naturally in English and how to speak about thoughts and emotions more fluently.
Many English learners know simple emotional vocabulary like worried, stressed, or nervous.
But native speakers often use more natural and detailed expressions during emotional conversations.
Especially when discussing anxiety, overthinking, and mental exhaustion.
Let's begin with one of the most useful sentence patterns.
The pattern is, I've been overthinking blank lately.
For example, I've been overthinking my future lately.
Or, I've been overthinking social situations a lot recently.
Native speakers use this pattern constantly during emotional conversations.
Another useful expression is, my thoughts keep going in circles.
That's such a natural phrase.
Yes, it means repetitive thoughts that never seem to stop.
For example, sometimes my thoughts keep going in circles at night.
Or, when I feel anxious, my thoughts start going in circles.
Another useful phrase is, I can't turn my brain off,
Very common expression.
especially among people experiencing stress or anxiety.
For example, after stressful days, I can't turn my brain off at night.
Or, my brain won't relax before sleep.
Let's build a longer, natural answer using several emotional sentence patterns together.
Good idea.
A natural answer could sound like this. Lately, I've been overthinking my future a lot.
Sometimes my thoughts keep going in circles, especially at night.
I know I worry too much sometimes, but it's difficult to stop thinking.
That sounds emotionally natural and fluent.
Emotional fluency is a huge part of real English communication.
Definitely.
Now let's talk about some common mistakes English learners make when discussing emotions and anxiety.
Mistake number 1. Using unnatural direct translations.
For example, my brain is thinking too much.
Native speakers usually say, I'm overthinking.
Or my mind won't slow down.
Another common mistake is, I have many stress.
Stress is usually uncountable in English.
So a natural sentence would be, I have a lot of stress lately.
Or I've been feeling stressed lately.
Another common issue is overly simple emotional answers.
For example, I nervous.
A more natural sentence would be, I've been feeling nervous and overwhelmed lately.
Or sometimes anxiety makes me overthink everything.
Adding emotional detail makes English sound much more fluent and human.
Let's introduce some useful emotional vocabulary connected to overthinking.
The first word is anxious.
Anxious means feeling worried, nervous, or emotionally uneasy.
For example, I feel anxious when I overthink the future.
Another useful word is overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed means emotionally overloaded by thoughts, responsibilities, or emotions.
For example, too many responsibilities can make people feel overwhelmed.
Another important word is restless.
Restless means unable to relax mentally or physically.
For example, when I overthink, I feel mentally restless.
Another useful phrase is emotionally drained.
Emotionally drained means mentally exhausted from stress or emotional pressure,
Native speakers use this phrase very often.
especially during conversations about burnout, anxiety, or emotional exhaustion.
Another important word is rumination.
Rumination means repeatedly thinking about negative thoughts or problems.
For example, rumination can increase stress and anxiety.
Let's talk briefly about social media and overthinking.
Modern technology affects mental health more than many people realize.
Constant comparison creates endless mental pressure.
People compare appearance,
Success,
relationships,
lifestyles.
even happiness.
Social media often creates unrealistic expectations about life.
Especially because people usually post only their best moments online.
Which makes other people feel like everyone else is happier, more successful, or more confident.
Comparison is deeply connected to insecurity and overthinking.
Definitely.
Let's teach another useful sentence pattern.
You can say, sometimes I worry too much about blank.
For example, sometimes I worry too much about what other people think.
Or, sometimes I worry too much about making mistakes.
Native speakers often use worry too much during emotional discussions.
Another useful expression is, I need to stop overanalyzing everything.
Overanalyze means analyzing something excessively or too deeply.
For example, I tend to overanalyze conversations after they happen.
Or, I need to stop overanalyzing small situations.
Overthinkers often search for hidden meaning in everything.
Especially socially.
Tone of voice,
Text messages,
facial expressions,
silence.
delayed replies.
Sometimes the mind creates emotional stories from very little information.
Which increases anxiety even more.
Another important part of overcoming overthinking is learning how to slow down mentally.
That's very difficult in modern life.
Especially because modern culture constantly encourages productivity and stimulation.
Phones, notifications, endless entertainment, constant information.
Many people rarely experience true mental quiet anymore.
Quietness can actually feel uncomfortable for overthinkers initially.
Because silence allows thoughts to become louder.
But sometimes, slowing down mentally is necessary for emotional balance.
Balance is such an important idea.
Healthy thinking is not the absence of thought, it's the ability to think without becoming trapped inside endless mental noise.
Exactly.
Another thing many people slowly realize is this.
Not every thought deserves attention.
That's such an important life lesson.
Just because the brain creates a thought does not mean the thought is automatically true.
Or important.
Or helpful.
Sometimes the healthiest thing a person can do is let certain thoughts pass naturally.
Instead of feeding them emotionally.
Let's teach another useful sentence pattern.
The pattern is, I'm trying not to think too much about blank.
For example, I'm trying not to think too much about the future.
Or, I'm trying not to overthink small social situations.
This pattern sounds calm, emotionally mature, and natural.
Another useful expression is, I'm learning how to quiet my mind.
That sentence sounds very peaceful emotionally.
Especially during conversations about stress, anxiety, or personal growth.
Let's do a little speaking practice.
If possible, try answering these questions out loud.
First question, what kinds of things do you overthink the most?
Second question, why do people overthink so much in modern life?
Third question, how does overthinking affect emotions and daily life?
Fourth question, what helps people relax mentally?
Fifth question, what advice would you give someone who struggles with overthinking?
Try using the sentence patterns we practiced today.
For example, I tend to overthink blank.
Or, my thoughts keep going in circles.
Or, I'm trying not to think too much about blank.
Or, I'm trying not to think too much about blank.
Speaking out loud helps emotional vocabulary become more natural and automatic.
And emotional conversations are an important part of becoming fluent in English.
Before we finish, let's quickly review what we talked about today.
We discussed anxiety, social pressure, mental loops, perfectionism, emotional exhaustion, and overanalyzing situations.
We also learned useful emotional vocabulary and natural sentence patterns for discussing thoughts and emotions in English.
We talked about social media, comparison, insecurity, and why modern life increases overthinking for many people.
And we discussed the importance of emotional balance and mental rest.
Most importantly, we talked about something many people experience quietly every day: overthinking.
And maybe one of the biggest lessons is this:
Thinking deeply is not bad.
caring deeply is not bad either.
The problem begins when thoughts become endless fear instead of healthy reflection.
Peace of mind often comes from learning when to stop feeding unnecessary thoughts.
And learning how to return attention to the present moment again.
Now it's time for our question of the day.
What do you overthink the most?
Write your answer in the comments. You can begin your sentence like this: I tend to overthink blank.
We always enjoy reading your answers. It's a wonderful way to practice your English writing skills.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe to Chill English channel.
Subscribing helps us continue creating calm and meaningful English lessons for learners around the world.
Keep practicing a little every day.
And remember, learning English is a journey.
Goodbye, everyone.
See you next time.